being trans is awful. Well, at least that's what we're told by the media, the government, certain authors, and charity groups. And this hatred and criticism can be a deafening wall of silence. And it's not our fault, and it's out of our control. When I say ours, I mean the trans community. Trans joy, on the other hand, is not awful. However, it's currently being seen and treated like a sacred shroud, never to be touched by a human hand. It's a fleeting thing, a scarce resource, like none of us could ever experience it. And it's often seen through the lens of trauma, pain, suffering, which is the opposite of trans joy. Now, in my own experience, trans joy hasn't always felt attainable. I felt uncomfortable, awkward, like there wasn't enough room for me to be myself. So I made myself as small as I possibly could so that life would take as little as it could from me. Now, it's taken me a really long time to work out, but I have worked it out. Trans joy is in all of us. Now, it might not be there every minute of every day, but trust me, it's there. As an advocate for my community, I see it as my responsibility, my role, to help us all find this joy every day. Now, when I wrote the book of non-binary joy, I was explicit about who and what those pages were for. It was a space for us, exclusively for us, to work out who we were. Now, I didn't define transphobia, I didn't explain dysphoria, and I certainly didn't talk about pronouns. We know all of this. We live it. We have these conversations every day. So why would we choose to focus on this? So instead, I chose to focus on the joy of knowing who you are, what that opens you up to, how to find that, and most importantly, how to do that right now. And the reason I'm able to unlock trans joy for my community in a relatively short amount of time is because trans joy is not radical. Now, as a writer, I found myself asking through this process, well, if it's not radical, what adjectives can I use to describe it to you? Well, don't worry, I've come up with 3. First of all, I would say that trans joy is mundane. Early on, with my experimentation and exploration of gender, I used clothing to explore and test my sense of self. Now, my first experience of trans joy came from the most, arguably, mundane of purchases, a pair of black, wide-leg trousers. Now, the polyester was so cheap that in low light, they created sparks. Yeah, I know. But I remember trying them on, and once the static wore off, I felt like the best version of myself. They were freeing, exciting, new. Now, that's a lovely anecdote. I'm sure we can all agree, but I'm sure we can also agree it's pretty mundane. There's no blockbuster film coming out of those trousers. So as I said, trans joy is mundane. But it's not only mundane. It's also individual. Now, we see and hear and consume the narratives written about us all the time, and it warps and distorts our sense of self, creating an image we don't recognize. And the same could be said about conversations about revered trans joy, where it's seen as a fleeting thing after years of abject misery. But this is one example, but it doesn't have to be yours. And that's what's so brilliant about trans joy. Because it's individual, we hold the reins of our journey with transness. It's self-defined, and we get to do it at our own pace, and it's brilliant. Now, last summer, I was at a queer retreat, and yes, feel free to roll your eyes, but bear with me. On the penultimate day, I was worn out. by workshops and labor-intensive conversations. What I needed was a break. So I grabbed a book, an audacious sun hat, and I went to the pool, and I sat with my feet in the water. Now, this is a rare thing because pools, traditional pools, are spaces ruled by binary rules. And so they have little to no consideration for the trans community. Now, over the next few hours, I was joined by people swimming, splashing, paddling. I watched trans people swim for the first time since their top surgery. Gender non-conforming people wearing whatever they wanted to swim. And I felt like we all had peace and a space to breathe. Now, all I did was sat being surrounded by my community, flipping through the pages of a rom-com I hardly remember. But what I do remember was the immense amount of trans joy that I felt in that moment. Now, this is one take on trans joy, and it was trans joy for me, but if you look back, all that really was a nice day where I got to be myself. So you can see that trans joy is individual. Now, as an advocate for a community, the way I behave, speak, dress, act, becomes seen as a standard. I'm sure some of you today will go away thinking this is what it looks like to be trans and non-binary, when in reality, there is an infinite amount of ways to be trans and non-binary. Which brings me on to my final adjective, which is everyday. Now, I have the pleasure of working with lots of brands and businesses, helping them to understand what it's like to be trans. And one of the biggest hurdles I explain is other people, which is a big hurdle, because other people are everywhere. When I say other people, I mean cisgender people and their opposition to the trans community in general. Now, this opposition can knock our confidence, and rightly so. Who would feel good being called morally wrong just for getting up and grabbing a cup of coffee? So you could argue that trans people need to find more confidence than most just to go out every day. So there's a problem here because confidence is often confused. And that has a lot to do with the media we all consumed in the early aughts. TV fashion gurus Trini and Susanna used their 360-degree mirror of shame to help us learn what not to wear, using new clothes to change participants' lives. TV stylist and presenter Gok Wan used the lure of high street jeans to give us all the confidence that we too could look good naked on camera. TV stylist Nikki Hamilton-Jones made it the most simple. All we needed to do was spend thousands of pounds on cosmetic surgery, get a dodgy haircut, and we too could look 10 years younger. And you probably sat there thinking, Ben, what's this got to do with trans joy? Don't worry, that's my next bit I'm going to tell you. None of that is confidence. Confidence is not spending money. It's not new clothes. It's not even arguably a dodgy haircut. Confidence is about moving beyond what other people think about you and getting comfortable with what you think about yourself. As trans people, that's realizing that we were never the problem. So as trans people, or one of the most hated, marginalized groups, how are we supposed to find the confidence to go out of our houses every day? Well, it's a thrilling moment as someone whose career was born on social media to bring you something I learned from a TikTok, watched probably whilst on the loo during one of the many COVID lockdowns. And that's the spotlight effect theory. Now, the spotlight effect theory is a cognitive bias, and it describes how we feel like we think other people notice us more than they actually are. Essentially, we feel like we're snagging the attention of every single stranger, a little bit like being on stage right now. And it makes sense. We're all the center of our own universe. why wouldn't everyone else be as obsessed with us as we are with ourselves? Now, let me explain it a little bit more simply for you. Imagine a spotlight on a person, or use the red carpet beneath my feet. This is the extent of attention we have for other people, this space. There's a whole stage unnoticed because we primarily focus on ourselves. That's okay, but we do it. Now, I can walk down a street, get on a train, or enter a room and feel like all eyes are on me. And that can be hard to shake. And I think as trans people, we feel that more. And we feel that more because we've had altercations. We've been filmed or photographed without our consent, or we've been victims of hate crimes. Harsh realities of being trans right now. But outside of these altercations that are horrific, most people haven't even noticed you. They're too busy with their own lives, too preoccupied to have ever even clocked that we were there. So the spotlight effect theory helps us understand why we might feel like we are the center of angst and anger and hatred that the trans community seems to attract. But it's understanding that this criticism, this critique, it's not our fault. And so these things might arise daily, whether it's face-to-face, in newspapers, or in horrible TV interviews. Regardless, it's going to be there. But this conflict, it's not about me, it's not about you, it's not really even about us. It's about the issue, the systems, the stuff we are stuck in, the stuff that we can't control. And it isn't the job of one person alone to fix, so it's not my job, it's not your job. It's the job of all of society. And so it's understanding if I'm going to give less time to this conflict, suddenly my schedule's wide open. I've got loads of free time every day. So I could fill that time every day with trans joy. So suddenly trans joy is not radical, it's routine. And if you give it the space to develop, you can have it every day. So we need to stop treating trans joy as radical, rare, even as an endangered species, and start seeing it as mundane, individual, every day. And suddenly, trans joy is accessible. It's attainable. It's realistic. And it's not just something I would aspire to have. And so, trans joy is not 30 years of soul searching. It's not having to shed your family. It's not 12 different yoga retreats. It's not even huge therapy bills. It's right now. And it's for all of us. So in a world of hostility, we could all do with more mundane, individual, everyday joy.